welcome back. Time now for a look at today's newspapers with Simon Mawson. Hello, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive hot off the press to us here at Sky News in the next half hour. We'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the barrister and futurist Andrew Eborn. Good to have you with us in the studio. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you first and talk you through them. The Sunday Telegraph reports on the end of the 75-hour manhunt for terror suspect Daniel Khalife. He was arrested in Greenford earlier today. The Daily Mirror, I'll escape, just watch me. They report the fugitive was bragging about his plan to escape prison before he did on Wednesday. Likewise, the Sunday Express covers the fugitive's arrest, saying he was carrying a sleeping bag and riding a bike when found. While the Mail on Sunday's headline reads, Spooks bugged phones to nail jailbreak spy. On the front page of the Sunday People, hell on earth, more than 1,000 people dead as an earthquake rocks Morocco. Of course, that's before the latest figures came out. The Observer reports on the former roles of the man who's now due to succeed Dame Alison Rose as chief executive of NatWest. In particular, his time working for the UK arm of a Saudi oil group. There is, however, no suggestion of any wrongdoing on his part. And the Sunday edition of The Star remarks on today's sweltering heat and forecasts one final day of the same tomorrow. And a reminder that by scanning the QR codes you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us talking about them. And we're joined tonight by Christina Patterson and Andrew Eborn. Let's get straight into it. Thanks for being in the studio. Good to have you with us tonight. OK, so first up, we have the Sunday Express. Police catch fugitive on canal bike ride. Nabbed on a bike, they say.
Extraordinary, isn't it? We've had this story which has dominated the headlines for so long, and you would think he would know, actually just stay undercover. There are so many questions which remain unanswered. And what's happened is that basically these people become folk heroes, don't they? People sort of celebrate the great escape and so on and so forth. And reminds me about Ronnie Biggs and what happened on July the 8th, 1965. He escaped, but went to Brazil famously for 36 years, virtually. And he became a folk hero. And he appeared with the Sex Pistols in various things and so on and so forth. It does raise all sorts of questions. And you touched on the basis as well about the technology that's used. And within this country, we're the most surveyed people in the world. It's been estimated there are about 7 million CCTV cameras following us, and we get recorded at least 70 times a day.
Especially in London, in the capital.
Absolutely. There's about almost 1 million just in the capital. So you would think that every single bit of emotion, literally, would get captured. What I find strange is why it took so long to find him, because actually I don't think it's strange they were going to catch him unless he walked very quickly and disappeared out of the country very quickly. Why it took them so long, I find strange.
Yeah, that is one of the many questions that need answering. Christine, let's talk about the Mail's front page. That's just come into us, and they've got a new line talking about how the intelligence services used bugging technology.
Yes, so I think I read about this somewhere earlier today, actually, that I think it's, in a way, it's an obvious thing that they're going to be contacting family, friends, people, known contacts of him, and listening in. Obviously, they can now listen in on people's phones. And so it's not a particularly surprising development. And we don't know anymore. We've heard no names mentioned. What we do know is that he came out of prison in a chef's outfit, where he had been, because he had been working in a kitchen with knives, unaccountably, for someone who was deemed a high risk, and was wearing completely different clothes, and had a bike, and had apparently a cold bag full of food. So clearly he had been given support by people, and we don't yet know whether those were friends, family, or whatever. We don't know whether this was planned in advance. He had apparently been boasting to people in the prison that he would escape. So clearly not much surveillance in the prison, but, you know, I'm sure we are all grateful that he's been caught, not only because he may or may not have been a risk to members of the public, but because it was such a heavy investment of police time and energy. And frankly, not very many crimes do get solved these days. So I'm glad that
there was a celebration also today of the fact that the police and the public worked in tandem to catch him. Let's talk about staying with this story. The Mirror's front page, him bragging that he would do it, I'll escape, just watch me. It kind of speaks to the other unanswered questions of how on earth did he manage to escape the prison and the state of prisons in Britain today, Andrew.
No, you're absolutely right. And as I say, Ronnie Biggs, basically, he put exactly that, the situation where he talked about going under a car, and he helped another prisoner called Ted Blair to escape in the same sort of way under a van, and he plotted that sort of stuff. But basically, Ronnie went over the wall. It was a 30-foot wall. That's how he did it. And people will escape all the time, unless you try and control what's going to happen. The interesting thing, though, is also the thing about police and their ability to track people down, to listen on phone conversations. And this is the big discussion in tech at the moment. To what extent can some of these platforms be obliged to enable that?
Right.
And when you have things that are called end-to-end encryption, such as things with WhatsApp, where nobody can listen, even the platforms themselves, then it does become a real issue. So what I find strange on this is actually there are lots of holes in the story. Why was he on a towpath so many hours afterwards, not on a bike and easily to be captured? What happened to the £20,000 reward with his undercover police officer? But also, to what extent was he helped? And you need to look at that sort of side. People are talking about being on the inside and so on and so forth. And what we do in the media, we always, where there's a hole in the story, we have to try and fill it, if you like. It's a vacuum. Never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. We try and invent some of these romantic stories on that sort of basis. What is guaranteed is this story is going to unravel over the next several months. And we must make the point that he's not yet convicted of anything. He's going to stand trial, I understand, in November. Time will tell whether or not he's convicted. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. And let's see how it pans out.
Yeah, and like you say, he does become a bit of an anti-hero. Very briefly, though, concern about the state of Britain's prisons?
Oh, absolutely. Prisons are hugely, hugely under-resourced, and Wandsworth is known to be disgracefully under-resourced. I think about 30% of prison staff lost their jobs when austerity kicked in. Many of them were very experienced prison officers. They've been replaced by very young often 18-year-olds with almost no training. So, you know, our understanding is that this was absolutely an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, and of course the numbers of prison officers to the numbers of inmates. Let's move on then. Prime Minister Sunak is in India for the G20 summit. The Express, though, taking a look at the, it says, the Rwanda migrant deal that others want. The deal's up for discussion, apparently.
Well, that's absolutely right. And Rwanda's that sort of dirty word we've been using all the time ever since Rishi Sunak sort of promised, one of his 5 promises, we're going to reduce the boats. And as the whole world was sort of focusing on one man potentially leaving the country, they had 2,188 trying to come in on these boats. It's a huge issue that we need to deal with it. There are other countries obviously have similar sort of problems, and we need to work out to what extent can we collaborate on this sort of basis. We also have to work out, and it's separating the genuine human stories where there are concerns, and we basically need to make sure that we look after those people with respect, but also those who are abusing the system, not least the criminal gangs who are charging people to bring them over in these unsafe boats.
And Christina, same story, but let's take a look at the Telegraph, page 1 as well, front page there. It was, by the way, it was the Express page 6 and 7 that mentioned the Rwanda deal. Illegal migration also discussed with Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni.
Yes, yes. Well, she, of course, is the leader of the Brothers of Italy. No, Brothers of, I can't remember what it's called now. Right-wing Brothers of Italy party, which is, you know, basically linked with Mussolini. It's got fascist roots. And I'm not sure that this is the kind of alliance that we really want to be forging. Some of the things that Giorgia Meloni has said, she has softened her stance somewhat, but they have been pretty shocking, actually. You know, obviously deeply, deeply anti-migrant, but also homophobic. She's very much associated, well, she is far right. And although she's presented a kind of gentler view in all kinds of ways, particularly when it comes to international diplomacy, her roots are in the far right and her instincts are in the far right. So I understand that many European countries have a problem with illegal migration. I understand that it needs to be tackled, but I'm not sure that she is the top person that Rishi Sunak should be forging alliances with in Europe at the moment.
OK, for now, coming up, should the royal family be made to pay reparations for their ancestors' roles in the slave trade? We'll discuss that next. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview here on Sky News. With me now in the studio is Christina Patterson and Andrew Eborn. OK, so let's get straight to it. Front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Royal family to face a demand to pay reparations for the slave trade.
Yes,
Christina?
well, Caribbean nations are apparently going to formally demand reparations. They're preparing a letter from the royal family. I mean, this is such a complicated issue because where do you start? And I'm not opposed to it, but where do you start and end in terms of reparations? The evils that have been done throughout history by anybody in power, essentially. I mean, frankly, if you're looking at the news today and the G20 and looking at what China has done in terms of evil to its people, if individuals could seek reparations from their government, that would be a good start. So I think, absolutely debts are due. Precisely how they get paid, how you put those sums together, how you hit on a number, how you handle it diplomatically is a whole other deal.
Interestingly, it will be probably for the lawyers to work out.
I would never complain. I'd never complain about the lawyers coming in to solve it.
I guess, look, this is a very serious matter. You're right. It's such a huge expanse of time and scenarios and issues that need to be tackled. But it is a case that there are people who are alive today who are descendants of slaves and it was their government of the day that treated them that way, same as the same comparison as China. So I guess there must be a formula or something.
Well, the problem is this, is that you look anywhere in history, it's littered with horror stories, and the way man's inhumanity to man was awful and still is. If you look, shine spotlight anywhere in the world, we've now come to a sort of age where anything, if it's labelled as racist, you remember the whole thing about the royal family with Meghan and so on and so forth, you use that word all of a sudden, then what happens is that all the shackles go up and they get very, very nervous about it. There was the scandal, and I would call it a scandal, about Lady Hussey. Do you remember, who was married to the previous chairman, Marmaduke Hussey, previous chair of the BBC. And she was thrown under the bus, I felt, because people overreacted on that sort of situation, which is...
you feel?
No, but I understand. That's why I think it's important that we do it sensitively.
Yes.
Because I do think that people bandy phrases like racist around too easily. Really, really important issues that we need to look at sensibly. But sometimes not everything, just because you label it racist, makes it racist. So it's right, there are horror stories, and we need to look at those to make sure they never happen again. That's very important. But let's handle it in a sensitive and sensible way.
Yeah, I think it will take quite some time to work out how to do this, won't it? Let's go back to the Express. Page 3, Harry at the Invictus Games. Smiles all
round.
Yeah,
well, happy because it's a year, obviously, yesterday since the Queen died. And, I mean, even those of us who aren't terribly monarchistic, I mean, I had huge affection for the Queen. Not that I have actually met her, but not that she was a friend of mine, obviously. But I think she was an extraordinary person who did great service to this country. But there were, kind of stories at the time about, Harry travelling separately and unfortunately missing her last moments and unable to say goodbye to her. So it's just heartwarming a year on to see Harry in his element at the games that he started, which have done such fantastic things for people whose lives could have been destroyed by what they went through in war. And I think his experiences in the army and in Afghanistan in particular were probably amongst the most profound of his life. I think they made him into the man he is, and I hope he gets the opportunity to do more of this kind of work, which clearly sets his heart on fire and brings out the absolute best in him.
Oh,
Yeah,
I think
absolute best in him and the absolute best in everyone in that audience as well.
Absolutely. 2014 was the first Invictus Games, and what I love is that the motto is I am, and the power and empowerment, just watching these brilliant people being given a new lease of life in a way. And some of the early memories, I mean, Harry's got a lot of strange relationship with the press, and it hasn't been very easy, let's put it that way, for the last several years. I always remember him as a youngster walking behind his mother's coffin. And I was in that audience, that crowd which surrounded the streets, and you could smell the lilies and so on and so forth. And Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, I know he spoke publicly about it, that he didn't want Harry to walk behind. He thought it would just be too much for the young lad to have to walk that in front of the crowds and so on and so forth. So the struggles that he's gone through, and in the media we have love-hate relationships with people, don't we? We love them for 1 minute, and then we sort of turn around and we hate them the next. At the end of all of this, people are people. And if you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? And I think when he turns around and talks about his own mental issues, that's an important issue, because somebody in the public eye, can help others in that situation. What he's doing for Invictus Games is glorious, and we should absolutely celebrate that.
Yeah, and we're hoping to see Meghan perhaps as well, right? So
yeah,
it's a real Sussex's affair.
Absolutely.
and they're joking about Nigeria versus Great Britain as well. Really good to have you with us to discuss all the papers and talk our viewers through what they should look out for tomorrow. Christina Patterson and Andrew Eborn, thanks very much.
Thanks very much for having us.